Thank you. I'm going to try to use the lapel because I am sort of frenetic at times. Not quite a caged lion like John. I don't know, John's here. He's not here right now. More like a caged wombat, kind of small. So I actually had the chance to drive here, which was unusual because I'm from Montana, but I'm actually I'm on sabbatical in New Hampshire. So it was lovely, and really appreciate the chance to be here on this side of your country. Today we're going to talk a bit more about what we can do with search experiences. So this is our obligatory, please engage in dialogue with us. We're both very active on Twitter. Those are our handles. And should you have other questions that need to happen outside of this venue, please just reach out to us. So a quick overview. What we're really going to talk about today is the idea of content and context and intention, and how you can do analysis and build that into search interfaces. I'm going to show a quick mock-up, a prototype of an anticipatory design in a search prototype. So this is just a basic library discovery type of layer. And then we're going to turn to some of the questions that came up while we were building this prototype, specifically around privacy and the sort of customization that we were using in this prototype. And finally, we'll round out on some of the user testing we're planning and have started with regard to this prototype itself. So our idea really started as I guess this is the smaller project I started at Montana State, and I am on sabbatical, but I do miss that place. Shout out to the 406. Really, what I started to think about was that we do a lot with search. I mean, this is a Pew Research study which talks about the most common engagement that happens within our digital tools. And it's 60%, over half, 58 to 60%, I think it dropped 2% this year, are about searching library stuff. Right? So there's a real opportunity here to think about what search is and how that is really one of the primary engagement layers for the library. So things like this sort of one search idea, this is our discovery layer that's primo right now. But what I really wanted to talk about also is, in order to really think about these layers, you need to start to unpack how people engage in them. How they engage is through text, typing, speech, into a query, a box, a form, and then it moves from there. What you think about when you have this exchange is mostly what we think about as the literal string, the sort of pattern match of the string itself. But one of the things I thought about with this prototype is that there's a lot more that goes on sort of around a query itself. So if we treat it as, this is John Searle, he's a philosopher of language. He talks about the speech act, and the literal utterance of the speech act is the thing that is said. But there's also these other pieces around that act, like context and intention. So there's possibilities here. And to give you a very recent example, this is Beyonce at the Super Bowl. Now, what's happening here is this is a performance of formation, and what she's doing is she's singing the song, right? And there are the words of the song, and there's sort of a literal interpretation of what's happening. But if you really think about the performance itself, these sort of historical analogs of the Black Panthers, which is what the dress is based on, the current context of Black Lives Matter, there's more to this than just the words and the performance. There's even the project of Lemonade, which is what she's promoting at the time. So you can kind of get around, you can start to understand that there's interpretation that happens when you work through with words, text, right? And I can sort of understand that this is not really a message. All these messages I can build my own context for. This one's not necessarily for me, the white cis librarian guy. But maybe, if we think a little bit more, sad trombone. The way we get here is through interpretation. And really what I'm asking us to do is think about search queries and what we can do, how we can interpret them more widely, more broadly, and then use that data that we build and learn about the query itself. So if we sort of reframe the search act as a speech act and think of it as the literal string and context and intention that surrounds any of that, you've got a search query, and then you've got the literal pattern, the match, and then the inferred aspects of that query. And that might look like something like this in practice. Again, I'm from Montana. Yellowstone National Park's query, there's that literal aspect, but then there are all these sort of residual pieces that are part of the context and the other interpretive moments of that query. Like this person is making that query on an iPhone on a Montana highway. And I do want to stress that in the first phase of this prototype, as we started to pull the data together, this was all very anonymous data. It's not, people don't log into this system. It's just stuff that's sort of floating in the air as a search exchange is made. So I'll kind of unpack what I mean by that. So first of all, you have cues from the query itself. And you've got things like how big is it, the word counts, is there punctuation, that can be an indicator of something. You have natural language questions that might come up, whether it's speech or whether somebody is just typing a question into the search box. And you can do things like watch for stop words, cue words that indicate natural language, and then run code that would potentially present different types of facets or engage in different ways with that user, depending on what query they're putting through. And then you have cues. This is sort of that implied context, cues from the machine itself. Just the HTTP request has a lot of information inside of it. And you can sort of understand context and place and time and space through what some of the headers expose as they're going across the wire, loading into a browser. And then you've got global server variables that also render with that. So things like user agent, English language, timestamp, where somebody is in time and space, right? Referring URL, you can watch where they came from, and you might, depending on if they're internal to your library website or if they came from an external source, you might present different facets based on that. So you also have the opportunity to look at where they're coming from a browser or from where they are on the network itself. This is JSON that we just saw in the last exchange, but it's just an API API return call that's just showing you a lot of information about where that person or that user is in time and space. And then just from the browser load, the act of the DOM, the document object model, that's the model that builds something and presents it inside of a browser to people. There's all kinds of things that happen there that JavaScript can pick up. So there'll be a couple of things kind of going out into the stream, reference articles. There's one in there that talks about a browser fingerprint, so that URL is in there. But this is the idea that there's sort of a unique pattern to everybody's browser. I mean, some of us look very, very similar, but there's information in there. And the JavaScript variables that you can get and use are things like what platform are they on, are they allowing cookies, their time zone, what height is their screen, are they on a device that has strong DPI? So there's just a lot of possibility with all of this, the literal string, and then you've got a number of things that you can do with the machine itself. And then as you work through, you have the query as it gets recorded. And you can do things like term analysis, term frequency analysis, to bring together the popular terms, common sizes of terms to help the search interaction. Okay. And again, stressing that There's more information you could get as you were logging this. You could log IP, time of day, but the stuff that comes through and that we used in this prototype was just strictly the query itself. So what you can do is you can use these cues to show different parts of the search index and show additional context. And this at its core is a form of anticipatory design, which is an emerging form of design that does things. It thinks about what it tries to introduce is sort of not necessarily a closed system, but a predictive system. And what it does is it looks at ways that you can use data, prior behaviors, business logic to sort of get at an automatic system. Sort of a shout out to when Shelley was talking about yesterday about the simplification of the libguide, right? This is the same kind of condensation of just bringing simplicity into your design process, but also making decisions for the user. And I hope that is kind of jarring to us because I think there are ramifications of making decisions for users. Okay. So the code itself is up on GitHub. I think I did tweet that earlier today, so you can take a look at it. The stack, it's for the prototype purposes. I use Google Custom Search Engine, so if you don't run Solr or something like that, you could sign up and use that as your indexing, and then the scripts just work across that API and pull things in. Python was mostly used to do some of the analysis on the machine, the text logs. And then, of course, HTML and CSS for presentation. The prototype lives at this URL, and I have tweeted that. And the slides are also available, and I can tweet them again if people are interested. So I was very deliberate in making this choice about sort of bifurcating the actual interface. On the left is just the sort of the 10 blue links that we expect. It's the 10 blue links that occur when relevancy, when a pattern is matched. Where the additional information is surfaced is on the right, where you have a number of ways, a number of things that you can place into there. And really this, when we framed this, when we started to think about this, I thought of search as a form of a conversation. So this is kind of where the inspiration comes. So in a small result set, first of all, again, trying to simplify as best as we can. If someone is having success with the system, they don't get as many facets because there isn't really, we made a decision there that there's not really a need for them to have a number of refinements because they've been pretty straightforward and had a successful search exchange. So in a smaller set, you get fewer facets, but you get things like categories, connecting to people, our FAQ, and then offers, which we'll talk a little bit about because the interface needs some UX help at times. In a larger result set, you can see on the right, a number of things grew. So as people are sort of struggling with the system, you see things that start to arise like hand-picked topics, topics by location. Again, using those machine cues and the various things that I kind of walk through. Popular, which we talked about with Chris Borg's. Somebody had a great question about the sort of primacy of popular things and how useful or unuseful that is. But again, the idea is to sort of, as you recognize people are struggling within the system, you provide more help, if that makes sense. The system also watches for things like the natural language. It has the stop words that watch, it looks like you're asking a question or you did use natural language as you were, and in that sense, it actually elicits or suggests, hey, do you want to talk to a person? Right. So this is just watching the string and kind of interpreting the intention. Again, on result set size, but this is more where the, looking at our human-created, our sitemap and our search logs, those logs that you saw, we can kind of bring together the hand-picked topics, the most common topics that classify our web, our material, or our catalog. And then finally, you can do things based on local context. So this is actually a suggestion based on time of year. It's October 1st, well, here and in Montana. And so what you get in this presentation is a suggestion that, hey, the days are getting shorter. It's getting a little cooler. Our reference librarians are ready to help you with research appointments, okay? In different times of the year, like when we're in the summer session, the prototype shows things like, hey, it's summer and the living's easy, you should read a book. Here's our browse collection, right? So you can, just by knowing where they are in the academic year, that's customization that you can kind of push. And then you can get even whimsical about it, because this is stuff where you can watch local weather, right? And then push things like, hey, it's cold, come on in for a hot cup of coffee. Okay. We're very deliberate, or I was very deliberate about the data sources themselves. So on the About page, it just shows the pieces of our website that are indexed, that are part of that custom search index, which again could be Solr or whatever your indexing tool of choice is. But, and I hope we're having a but moment. Oh, that didn't sound right. There are questions, right? There is this tension of personalization and customization. You could kind of see as I was building the prototype, understanding that there were questions that were arising. And there was a moment where I started to recognize this thing, this prototype, as a digital literacy tool of sorts. Because when we start to move into this environment, things get hard, and they might even get creepy at times. And so what we start to cross into is that there is this thing called the Uncanny Valley. It's mostly it's a term that refers to robotics, and it speaks to when we look at humanoid type objects, we have an expectation of how an eye should look, how an arm should move. And when it doesn't do that, we experience sort of a revulsion from that thing. I think the same thing happens in our systems. And so what we started to talk about when Krista saw the prototype and started to think through what else we might do with it and what questions we might ask about it was just trying to understand the uncanny valley of search experience. And if you remember, there are examples of this that we've lived through. If you've been, I don't know which, I can't remember which Microsoft Office this was. This is Clippy. He used to chat. And it was gendered. It was Microsoft Bob when they created it. So he used to chat at you about things like, do you want to make a letter? Oh, no, do you want to open a document? And it worked all right, and he had friends in high places. But it didn't end well for Clippy because he's no longer part of the Office suite, because what they had done with that piece of software is they had really optimized for first-time users. And so as you started to become an expert in that system, all Clippy was noise, right? And this is another one of those dangers of when you start to do customization. So as I worked through that first prototype, I started to recognize that there are ghosts in the search machine, and that there was a question for us of what do we do? What do we choose to do with them as a profession? And that's where Krista was an interlocutor and really brought forward and opened this dialogue about what's next. How do we see using and testing this tool, this prototype?
Okay, yesterday you couldn't hear me. Today you can't see me because I'm behind a podium. So I was excited by Jason's tool. I thought there was a lot of potential there. But I had two questions in mind. The first was, are students going to use this? Are they actually going to look at the right-hand side of the screen at all? So I had questions about usability and user experience. But I also had questions about privacy. Are our students and our faculty members going to expect this kind of personalization coming from the library? Is it going to be considered creepy that the library is adjusting things based on who they are and what they're typing in? So this led to questions about privacy. So as Jason mentioned, Chris's talk yesterday talked about the importance of showing where your resources are so people can at least you're a little more open with the biases that are coming, with the resources that you're using. So the tool does state explicitly what it's pulling from right now, but I think for a lot of the people that we're serving, it's not going to mean very much to them, and some of these things kind of scare people. You say IP to people, and they're like, what's that? So the question was, do people really care about privacy? And I think it depends what group you're looking at. I think our students tend not to care very much. They're already doing a lot on social media. They're giving up a lot of information and not always thinking about it. We might have a different response from our faculty members, for example. We are in Canada where Google servers are bad. If it's on an American server, it's bad. So, is this information going to be considered something too scary? Now, the type of resources we're pulling from originally are quite unassuming, and they're anonymous, but there's potential for this kind of thing to grow, right? So where is that line? According to the Pew Research, there are a couple of really good Pew Researchers reports that came out this year. This one came out in early January. The answer is, of course, it depends. It depends on what they're getting in return, what the value is. So about 80% of the people said it was okay if they were getting a perceived value. Now, perceived value is a bit subjective, and are better search results enough of a value for our users to think that this tool is something useful? We don't know. So how do you test privacy attitudes? I do a lot of usability testing, UX testing. This is qualitative data where we're going. We're going after attitudes. So how do you actually test an attitude? The answer is you don't. But because we wanted to do some usability testing on the tool itself anyway, we can take the opportunity while we've got students and faculty members captive to ask them questions about privacy in general terms to kind of get that privacy baseline. So we want to do some user testing. It's coming. Life gets in the way. Things don't move as fast as you want them to. So we will hope to share those with you, but we haven't actually got to the testing yet. So this is all very much getting feedback to help our tests get better at this point. So if you want to look at the testing and the scripts, they are available. So what did we want to do when it came to actually testing the tool itself? We had two real things that we wanted to test to start with. First, we wanted to test the facets, see if they were responding appropriately, and see if these students were even using them. Is it going to be too confusing to have a set of results on the left and then see a set of results on the right? Are they going to go to the right and not look at the left? Are they going to go to the left and not look at the right? What are they going to do? The other thing we wanted to test was the terminology and whether or not it was actually useful terminology. So one of the facets you can get is offer. Do our users expect an offer from the library? Is a coffee going to be considered an offer? Are they going to ignore it because they think it's $25 off somewhere? Is that actually going to be useful? So terminology and the facets were the two things that we are interested in doing some testing on. So we're doing scenario-based, which is probably one of the better types of testing to do. You're probably very familiar with it, but if not, scenario-based, instead of giving a very explicit direction, which often includes the terms of the thing that you want to test, you create a scenario that is a little more, a little closer to what you might actually run into day to day if the user was by themselves. The hardest part of testing, of course, is not jumping in and pointing to the screen to say, it's right there, just go over there. But by doing this, we get extra results because we can see where the pain points really are in the products that we're testing. So we may find out new pain points we didn't even think about. So this is just an example. So instead of saying, what are the hours and where is it, you give them a scenario, this is probably, 2 days is probably a long time. This should be something, your paper is due tomorrow, you need to get it in. How do you find out when the closest library opens? So hopefully you'll find out that they do go to hours, or they do go to location. As always test your test. We're kind of at this phase right now, and we're hoping that some of the test feedback can come from you guys as well. But what we really want to do is get a privacy baseline as well. So not only test the tool, but figure out what that baseline is. And I think one of the neat things that we'll get out of this, and I don't know if there will be a difference, but I am interested to see if there's a difference. Both Jason and I are going to do the testing. I'm going to do it in Canada. Jason's going to do it in the States. Is there any difference? I think the biggest difference will probably come from faculty, but we will wait and see. So what we want is this privacy baseline, and these are the kinds of questions we're going to ask. We're not going into really in-depth things like, do you know what a cookie is? But we want to know, do you use services like Google or Facebook? We do know that a lot of customization is out there. So what are we going to do in order to bring that in? So results, we don't really have any right now, but we do know from the peer reports that, people do find profiling kind of creepy, that most Americans don't really understand the nature and scope of the data collected on them, so they may not, these may be moot. Most are not really very confident that search engines are going to keep their data private, so is this going to be considered in the same light? And one of the things I'm also interested in, probably at phase 2, is what about the mobile aspect. So location data, people are getting quite concerned about keeping that private. So if we are driving on the road and you type in Yellowstone National Park and you get different information, is that going to be of concern to our users? So I'd like to do some mobile testing to see if the data that we're pulling makes any difference in there as well. So this is one of the peer reports. The other one's on post-Snowden privacy. Some acknowledgements, further reading, and questions.
Got time for a question or two? Any questions? Okay.
So I've got an Android phone, and because I'm a pretty big, butch-looking white guy, I've got location history turned on because I mostly don't care. So one of the interesting things about the Android phone is the Google's assistant, Google Now, keeps track of your location and what you search for and things like that. So on Tuesday evenings, it'll tell me how long it takes me to get to the rec center where I do Aikido, because it knows that I go to that rec center every Tuesday, well, except for the last 5 months, because I've fallen off the wagon. And every so often on Thursdays, it'll say, oh, by the way, it's 7 o'clock on Thursday. It's about 20 minutes to drive to Samantha's house, because Samantha's a friend of mine, and every so often I go over there. And it's like, apparently I've been seeing Samantha a little bit more often recently than usual. So the commercial services are already doing some of this kind of stuff. I mean, if you search Google Maps, if I search Google Maps on any device that I'm logged into, and then go and look at Google Now, my phone will tell me, oh, that place you searched for, it's a 35-minute drive away, and here's the route to get there. So yeah, it is creepy. But like I said, I don't care, so I just sort of swipe it off and say, ooh, Google's getting a little too carried away here. But I think that our users are going to start getting used to that.
Yeah,
The problem is managing. How do we give users the option to say, no, I don't want that kind of thing in a reasonable way?
Yeah, and I think that's an important question. And I think it is something people are going to get more used to until something drastic happens, and then everybody will recoil. But I do wonder if it also matters who's doing it, right? I expect it from Google. I expect them from Facebook. I know that they're just going to be getting into every aspect of my life. I don't know if I would expect it from my library. So there might be some user expectations there that may come to play in the privacy and the personalization, that uncanny valley part, that will experience that a commercial provider may not. I mean, we tend to be very we fight hard for privacy. We don't give out our records, and now we're going to be doing a service where we're taking information from your browser and using it to feed it back a result. So I think there might be a bit of tension there, and I could be wrong. I'm interested in seeing if it's just me.
Okay. Last question.
I just kind of want to feed off of a point that you had just made. You were talking about how we protect records and we don't give them out, and we often clear things like checkout histories. But if you are using this to customize their results and you're gaining more information about them, something to think about is what do we need to do on our end to continue to protect those records so somebody doesn't come back and say or ask for that stuff and that information that we have, that we are customizing these for them.
Yeah.
So I guess more of a comment, less of a question.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to what is the line where it's okay? Right now, we're not taking IP addresses and things like that. It's simply keywords, and it's anonymized. There's potential for it to go beyond that, and yeah, it is definitely a concern. How do you protect that if we are going to offer that as a service?
Okay, well, please join me in thanking Krista and Jason.